Hi there, and a very warm welcome to our 100th summer special episode. I needed a lot of time to practice that. It's still not perfect though. So, what we're going to do today is listen to me ramble on a little bit about the past, the present, and the future. And mainly so because it's blazingly hot outside and my brain wouldn't work correctly. So I wasn't able to prepare a tutorial actually, like the 2 weeks now, as you might have noticed. So what we're going to do is talk about the channel, how it came to be, how it is doing, and about the future a little bit. So of course you have a saying right, a steering opportunity for this channel and the future. So with your suggestions, you can basically say in which direction we are pivoting. And this is all for that. Hopefully you like this episode. A little bit of me and my circumstances and rambling on casually. So without further ado, as always, let's grab your coffee and let's keep going. So what we're going to do here is look at the past first, the very, very distant past where I started 3D basically. So let's jump right in and let's have a look at my couple of first 3D images. So, and don't kid ourselves, I think the past is where we're going to spend the most of our time, because you already know what we did in the present and the future is not written yet. So now let's jump in. Okay, let's all bring out our nostalgia grandmother, as in the next few minutes nostalgia will hit hard. And by the way, this is a reference to Inside Out 2. If you haven't seen it, I really recommend it. You ask, why is that? And I say, I just decided to show you my early works before 3D, where I got interested in computer graphics. So back then, with my Wang computer, I made a render of this. I discovered Paint. And this is what the interface actually looked like. If you're wondering why it's so small on your screen, this was the actual resolution. So what I did back then in Paint, I pixeled pictures like this. And if you know any modern software, you ask, what's the big deal here? And basically I had to go in there and pixel every pixel on my own. So dot, 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 something like this. And this is how I spent my time as a teen on a computer monitor with very limited resolution, dotting my pixels to get gradients in my images. What I find really funny is that Paint in all those years didn't change that much, so still the main functions here apply. Basically, this is what I did back then, just a little bit more tidy, and then just got pixels in there. By the way, this is how I looked like back then, and don't ask me about the bleached hair. This is an even longer story. It also occurred to me that you might want to look at the workstation I was using at the current time. You have seen the one I've used in the render before. This is an actual picture and some sort of the only one I have of this area, unfortunately. Now, the trend of pixelating stuff held on for 1, maybe 2 years, but then I got over it and finally moved into my final phase that I'm still in, the 3D phase. Now, there's an actually funny story how I came to be a Cinema 4D user. It's a longer one, but the gist of it is that I installed 3D Studio Max first, and I didn't know a lot about computers back then, so I installed it with the graphics drivers. But I didn't have any dedicated acceleration card for 3D, so Max would crash on startup. So I took the next software, and this is Cinema 4D, and it ran fine, so I stayed with it all the time. The Cinema 4D version I started with is version 4. So this one here is a package I photographed when I had the chance by visiting the Maxon headquarters a couple of years ago. And I really love how this spreads early 90s vibes. And it's all in German because I don't know if you know, Maxon is actually a German company. Hi there, and a very warm welcome to this Cinema 4D tutorial. Let's see what we're going to do today. I actually have no idea how to navigate here. Okay, so Alt doesn't seem to work. Maybe this. Okay, so you can basically select your rotation and move tools here. Let's try to create a object. I guess this is this one here. So let's go for a plane. Okay, I have to set everything up beforehand. So let's go 0, 0. I actually don't know this anymore. Okay, so we can't have 0 here. I definitely worked with this version at some point. So we have a plane, and then we can rotate around that. Okay, so the rotation, by the way, is inverse to what we know nowadays. Let's actually make a sphere here. Let's see if we have a sphere. Yeah, it's labeled all in German, by the way. So again, we have to predetermine the settings here. Oh, there's the perfect sphere already there. That's interesting. And the object manager also looks kind of the same. We have the tags here. Nice. Let's actually create a light source. So I guess this is under this menu as well. Blinds, object. Okay, I must have overlooked it. It's right here. Okay, so hopefully we can access those settings later on, because I know that those are gone as soon as we click OK. Oh, and I can still remember the interpolation for these shadows, because the shadows weren't ray traced back then. They had shadow maps here. And look at the maximum resolution for the shadow map. So let's go there. I think my computer can handle this. And then go OK. And yeah, we created a light source. Now we have to move it somehow. So I guess we go into object mode. And then how do we actually move stuff around? Can we just grab it? Okay, now I'm rotating it. Let me see. I want to move it. Okay, so I guess we need to go into some sort of side view. The F keys are not working here. So I need to go back in the camera. Let's see if there's some side views here. Oh, we can restrict access. Maybe that's a good thing. Oh, there's only one undo step as well. So very old software. So we cannot even undo our light back to the position where we want it. So actually, let's go and move it on the Z axis here. Let's see if that works. Here we go. Z. No, it still moves in all axes. Oh, no. Okay, so, and then we move it up a little bit. Here we go. And what we all have been waiting for here is to render out stuff. But before we do that, let's actually give a material to our sphere, for example. So we go new material. And then I guess we double click. Oh, look at this. Also, the material editor is not too different from what we have today. So let's add a specular light. I think we have to, yeah, turn it on there, make it a little bit more shallow. Of course, this has nothing to do with photorealism. And let's make the color reddish, something like that. Well, that's orange, but anyway. Can we drag it onto the sphere? Look at this, it's actually working. So let's actually figure out how to render. I guess it's somewhere here. Oh yeah, it says like picture compute, and we want to compute all. Actually, look at the shortcut, it's still the same. And we have made our first render in Cinema 4D R4. Probably this would have rendered for 1 or 2 minutes back then. I don't see any shadows, and the image actually is aliased as heck. But let's stay with that. Let's call it good. So I would say this concludes this Cinema 4D R4 tutorial. Thank you for staying with me. Oh man, I really have a blast here. I hope you do so too by watching me figuring this old version of Cinema 4D out. And it's really amazing how far we've come in such a short time. Look at this. I mean, it's a mystery to me how people could have used that to make really great artworks back in the day, including myself actually. Speaking of artworks, here are a couple of my old renders. Of course, back then there was no YouTube, so it took quite some time to get better, and those were made when I already was a lot better than when I started. Another small anecdote, objects simply weren't parametric back then. For example, the tubes on the machine, instead of a sweep where you can move the spline, you had to move the spline and the radius and then convert them into polygons, and then your radius and your spline were gone. And with only one undo step, you had limited resources. So you had to duplicate the spline every time you would convert a sweep, because otherwise you might lose it. And of course here too, stuff that all the artists are doing, probably in a later version of Cinema 4D, maybe R7, the sphere on a checkerboard. But enough of the old nostalgia, let's get a little bit more modern and talk about when I first created my YouTube channel. So the first video I uploaded was a logo animation, and you can actually see I'm a bit obsessed with my logo at this time. Maybe I'm still obsessed with it nowadays, I don't know. But what we can see here is that I upload a lot of videos because I had no intention to ever do tutorials back then. This is something that came in mind later on. So back in the day, actually the new kid on the block was V-Ray, and it was around the same time I started my YouTube that I got to play around with it, and I actually bought it from the money from my first jobs I made in the 3D field. So yeah, that's a very exciting time, and compared to the Cinema 4D standard renderer, which is still a thing, the V-Ray renderer was faster and had more options. For example, it had area lights that worked like real area lights. Basically a lot more photorealism all around, including relatively fast rendering GI. But nothing compared to what we have nowadays with fast GPU accelerated renderers like Octane, for example. So, welcome back here, and you probably are wondering why I always cram in some tutorial-ish sections here. And basically it's because otherwise this wouldn't be a tutorial and therefore not a 100th tutorial episode. Also, I think it's big fun to have a blast from the past and deal with old software versions. So some of you might already have spotted it, and this is the V-Ray button up here. So I managed to install V-Ray on Cinema 4D R18, so quite a bit of time has passed since R4. So let's actually engage V-Ray here and go to the settings, and it's actually a pretty new version here, so I think it was V-Ray 1.0 when it started in Cinema 4D. What's really funny to me is how the human brain adapts to time, in that I was really an expert in all the settings here, but nowadays I can't remember anything about it. Even the DMC sampler like this was very complicated to steer and get right. If I remember correctly, there was a way to get more options in here. I think it might be here. Yeah, so now we have even more settings at our hand. And I think this version of V-Ray was actually the first one that had real-time preview, but it never worked that well in Cinema 4D. But I'm going to showcase it without that. So what I want to do first here is go to, I think, the anti-aliasing and set it to bucket mode, because this is what V-Ray did. And then we're going to actually make the same scene again we already did back then. This brings me to an idea. I saved the Cinema 4D R4 scene and I'm going to drag it in here. Oh my god, would you look at this? The Cinema 4D R18 reads in the old scene from Cinema 4D R4. Isn't that incredible? So we saved on modeling time here. What we can do is delete the material, delete the light, and I don't know why it came in with an environment, but let's also delete that. And then we are getting our V-Ray stuff going. As I mentioned, V-Ray is a huge step forward in terms of rendering already. So we have a lot of options, especially compared to Cinema 4D R4. So let's bring in the light here let's go with a rectangle light and then move it a little bit to the side and up. So we roughly have the same position than the light in Cinema 4D R4. And before we render, let's actually get our sphere the material. So let's go to V-Ray Bridge and then V-Ray Advanced Material. I'm sure there are other materials that we can use. So let's see. Well, in terms of settings, this looks very advanced. But in terms of other stuff, we don't have nodes, for example. So this is not very advanced. First of all, let's go to the diffuse and make it a orange color. Something roughly similar to what we had in the R4. And then we are going with a specular layer. I remember always choosing the middle layer here, so I have some above and some below in case I need them. And then go and make this a little bit more rough. V-Ray had this glossiness system, so a glossiness of 1 was a roughness of 0 for other renderers. So let's go with a little bit of roughness here. And then last but not least, let's go with a GGX here because this already had GGX. I really love the nostalgia kick. You can see the highlights here are very grainy. Let's actually see what this looks like by applying our material to the sphere and then rendering. And this looks very nice and it's a lot faster than I remember because when I started with V-Ray, you only had 1 or 2 cores, and this computer here has 36. There's one addition I want to do here in V-Ray because V-Ray was famous for its good global illumination, at least back then, relatively speaking again. So let's actually go to the layer here, to the floor, move it about, and then rotate it upwards, and not 100 degrees, 90 degrees, and then move it up a little bit. And then make the light source a little bit stronger here too. Render again. And you can see there's no GI still, so the shadow here is black as always, so no indirect light. So what we need to do, and this is also the same for every one of those older renderers that are not path tracers, we need to turn on GI. So let's turn it on and we can see a primary and secondary engine here. And this is very analog to what we find in Redshift nowadays, for example. Actually, a lot of V-Ray reminds me on Redshift, and I think the engineers of the early builds of Redshift really took a license to copy from V-Ray. So while the GI was good for its time, it was a pain to set up, and this is also why we have a lot of presets here. So for example, if I set this to Iridian's cache, you can see there's a couple of settings here that you all can tweak to refine your GI. Now let's render our scene with GI, and while we do that, let me introduce you to the concept of pre-passes. So V-Ray seemingly rendering the same area multiple times. That means it caches the GI in one go and then caches the secondary GI and only then renders the final image. Dependent what you had in your scene, for example, SSS also triggered another pre-pass. You can end up multiple minutes rendering pre-passes until you actually see what V-Ray is calculating in your beauty. Again, while I have great fun digging into the old times, I really appreciate the process we made until then, and we don't have to think deeply about GI and all the fancy stuff on top, as it's mostly very easy to use nowadays. So using V-Ray, I did a lot of tests and uploaded it to YouTube. And then something happened that would change my career and also the way you know me, because Octane came out. It was in a version back then, and I took it on and tested around with it. It was a little bit different back then. You couldn't do it within Cinema 4D. You had to export it to the standalone. But I was very surprised by the fast rendering capabilities of GPU rendering. So what I tried out was to do different scenes. And I got a lot of feedback and also a lot of questions from people. And that is what sparked my tutorial interest, basically. So I thought maybe it would be a good idea to do a tutorial. So I did the first tutorial, Actually not on Octane, but on Cycles Render for Cinema 4D, which came out a little bit later than Octane, but roughly the same time.
Hello and welcome to my first tutorial. My name is Raphael Rau. You may also know me as Silverwing, and today I want to talk about linear workflow.
As you might have heard, the audio quality wasn't good at all for the first tutorial, and this is because I recorded with a headphone mic. And I also noticed that when I listened to it, and this is already the denoised version, maybe AI can do a better job nowadays, but back then it was the most I can do. And I noticed that, and as I wanted to go in to record more tutorials more professionally, I actually bought more equipment, audio equipment, to mitigate that, and some of it you can still see here. So with the audio equipment installed, I got everything for a professional tutorial. So the first tutorial I recorded was a Octane tutorial, finally on 28th of September 2016, about the priority settings of Octane. So remember the 28th of September. Well, maybe this is wrong, but also right. Hello everyone. Yes, I've heard you want Octane tutorials. This is not a tutorial though, but a quick tip about the render priorities, because I've seen a lot of people got confused with those. So it turns out that expensive audio equipment alone isn't enough to motivate me into doing regular tutorials. For the longest time, I have been very sporadic and there are very long distances between tutorials. So the pandemic hit and also a recession where I got very few jobs. And therefore, I had the opportunity to rethink and refocus, and I discovered the tutorial business again. So I started a now unbroken series at the 25th of September 2021 with the custom AOV tutorial, where I now just keep going with current tutorials until this day. And that brings us to the second to last point this channel went through, which is monetization. So initially I thought YouTube might do the job by getting commercials on my videos, but it pays out very low sums, especially with the viewership I have. I think this is very niche. I am very thankful for you, don't get this wrong, but the amounts of views are very limited in this sector. So people are interested in Cinema 4D, Blender a little bit, and Octane. So I thought I might explore other ways, which came to be Patreon. So on the 1st of April, I signed up for a Patreon account. So maybe that's not the best kind of date to do that. But anyway, here we are. So I actually made this a little bit of an experiment, since I am a open source kind of guy, meaning that I'm not into paywalling content. I don't want the content to be limited to people that can actually pay for it. I want it to be open for all. And this is true because on YouTube, everyone can watch it. Now, having said that, I still wanted to gain some extra money. So actually, I just asked the people for a donation basically through Patreon. And this actually worked better than I expected, with some of those people actually donating 50 euros per month on a monthly basis, which is quite a substantial amount of money. And obviously, I'm really, really grateful for that. Okay, let's connect the present and the future in one lump, because I don't want this to be longer than it needed. So it should be at least entertaining and not lengthy and boring for you to watch. So in the present, as you noticed, I have sort of a summer lump in my head and have difficulties getting tutorials out of there. And this is actually where you all come in, because I am really heavily relying on you to give me topics for tutorials that I then have motivations to do. because, of course, motivation is a key ingredient in doing good content, because I think it sort of shows if you don't have the right motivation for it. So when I do stuff that I did over and over again, then I sort of lack motivation. And those tutorials where I explored something that is new for me too, like the CD shader, I am very motivated, and I think that also shows in the tutorials. So I am relying on you, not only for donations, but also for you to steer me in the right directions where I can give you the best of me by being motivated and a great content creator, although I don't like that word. Now, in terms of the future of the content on the channel, I think not a lot is going to change. I'm still going to post Cinema 4D and Octane tutorials primarily, while I really want to fit in more Blender content. I hope I have more time in the future, maybe to do an extra Blender tutorial every now and then, but let's see how this is going. I know that there's still some tutorials missing, the Opal tutorial. I'm still hitting walls there. It's not as easy as I thought to do that. I thought making the CD shader will give me a big step or get me a huge leap forward. But there's so much things to explore still to the Opal shader to be finished. And also the PCB tutorial is still waiting on you. You can see I am working on that. There's some footage on me tracing some traces. In the beginning, I tediously painted pixels. Now I tediously traced traces on PCBs. So it seems like my determination is to do tedious tasks, then do them excessively for a time. And that is it. That's our 100th episode. I hope I gave you something unexpected, a little bit of nostalgia, maybe a lot of nostalgia, hopefully. And yeah, a bit of rambling as I promised in the beginning. So that leaves us with our usual program, and this is to thank our patrons. So thank you for staying with me that long. Let's thank our Patreons, especially those €50 tier subscribers. Shields Augustinen, Just a Frickin', and Leon Studio TV. Also, of course, a huge thank you for my €15 tier subscribers. For Die Thieves, Render King, Alessandro Bonchio, Alessio De Vecchi, Andrew Niehaus, BVR, Chris Fritchie, Christian Grajewski, Erbe Plus Academy, George Luna, Graham Bucknell, Joel Muckemer, John Edward, Ludger, Muradan Axos, Nico Straub, Part 1 of 2, Kuok An Dang, Ralf, Random Capybara, Raiko, Renato Marquez, Reshock, Shamus Johnson, Shiro 2049, Terry Wayne Ranson, and Yassin Rupp. Thank you all so very much for making it possible to produce those videos that you all enjoy. Hi there, and a warm welcome to those special guests who are still remaining. Man, I really underestimated how much editing it is if you weave in some pictures every now and then and not just recording a tutorial. I'm now 20 hours at the computer roughly, so hopefully this is finished soon and I can go to sleep. If you want to show your support, let's post a 100 what else in the comments down below. As always, I wish you a great rest of the weekend, though it's not very long, I guess, and a fantastic start into this week. Or whenever you're watching this later, a fantastic time all around. And now, without further ado, I say goodbye and happy celebrating.